VMware. In this nugget, we'll be discussing VMware, and with VMware, there's a number of different reasons why we want to use it. Primarily, as hackers, we want to be able to protect ourselves from other hackers. A lot of the tools that we'll be installing and testing with can not only be used to attack other computers, but it can also be used to attack us. So we don't want the tables to be turned against us, so to speak. A lot of things that we'll be doing as hackers are also experimental, and we're just testing things. It doesn't necessarily mean that all the software and things that we'll be using are well tested in advance and that they're supported by some retail company of some kind. So we'll have to protect our real machine, our production machines and our personal machines against any potentially unstable machines. We'll also take a look at using VMware, take a look at some of the tricks of the trade, show you how to make your way around VMware so that you're comfortable with it and you can use it competently as a hacker. Well, now, one of the first things we'll want to establish here is, why do we even want to use VMware? What's the advantage? One of the reasons why we'll want to do this as hackers is that it gives us network isolation. If we want it. Sometimes you'll want to have a virtual machine that is capable of communicating on the internet or on a physical network. And you can certainly configure them to do that, but as we'll see when I configure VMware a little bit later on here, you can also configure VMware so that it is only able to communicate with other virtual machines, and that might be very handy if I don't really need full network access at that point. For example, if I'm just trying to crack a password file or a shadow file, for example, in Linux, which we'll talk more about when we discuss password cracking. In any case, I don't really need network activity there. I can do that locally. And that might be a good idea for a hacker's perspective because we happen to have to work with a lot of what people would consider viruses or malware, spyware, those kinds of things. And I don't want to have malware or spyware running on a virtual machine that's exposed to the public internet, because then someone could take over my computer potentially. And we always run that risk as hackers, and eventually it will happen. But we want to try to minimize that as much as possible. Network isolation helps that. And then also, we have the advantage that we get hardware consolidation. I mean, I must work with 8 or 10 different machines during various times throughout the week. I really don't want to go out and spend thousands of dollars on 8 or 10 different physical hardware computers. Instead, I usually run 3 or 4 machines inside of virtual machines inside of one physical machine's operating system. So I'm able to consolidate my hardware investments. And as a result, I usually have one machine that primarily runs virtual machines, and then I also have a laptop that I'll run a couple of machines on too if I need to. And although it's not an advantage that I've listed here, another advantage is I can also transport those. If they're small enough to fit on a DVD, then I can just copy the entire virtual machine directory to a DVD or over the network, copy it to a different machine, and run it on that other machine instead if I want to. If I want to help to distribute the load for all these virtual machines I've got running. Also, the performance is actually pretty good. For just most general tasks, for most even server-oriented tasks, I really can't see that much of a difference in terms of performance. Now, your virtual machines are not going to be high-end gaming machines. They don't have the graphics capability for that. And in terms of performance, it is shared resources. So if you have 1 gigabyte worth of RAM in your computer, and you have a virtual machine that requires, let's say, 512 megabytes, which really isn't that much, then that leaves you with 512, if I can write here, 512 megabytes remaining here. Okay, so you just do have to consider that as well. If you've got 2 or 3 virtual machines running, then you're going to see that your paging file starts to grow and get more active as well. Now, just for our purposes, because most of the things that I will do in our virtual machines are not extremely memory intensive, I typically reserve about 128 megabytes of memory, even for my Windows 2000 servers or for any of my Linux machines. I really usually don't need much more memory than that because they're usually performing pretty simple tasks. Now, of course, with VMware, most of what we're doing as hackers is just testing and trying things out. We're not using these as production machines. We're not running company spreadsheets on these virtual machines or anything like that. We're really pretty much testing with various tools that we have and various experiments that we're trying to perform. And that's why we use virtual machines, because we don't want to crash something that happens to be a production machine, or the machine that you primarily use to check your email and keep your business running, or keep your life in order and all of that. So we'll just do it on a virtual machine, perhaps even inside of your main production computer, and isolate any damage that could happen to it to that virtual machine. And then here's a big one: snapshots. Now, just as an example of what good a snapshot is here, I've gone ahead and launched Windows XP computer here to illustrate that. Notice that at my mouse pointer, I'm going up here to this toolbar item, and there's a little item there that says Manage Snapshots for Virtual Machines. Well, I can just go ahead and take a snapshot, and I would do this before I'm about to perform an action on the computer that could be potentially hazardous, or just kind of like the same time where I would create a backup of a machine, or where I would otherwise, on physical machines, maybe create a ghost backup or some kind of an image. And I could just call this this snapshot, snapshot 3, and then I could say potentially hazardous, if I can spell, action. I guess I don't have to spell very well since I'm a hacker, but anyway, action about to happen. So in any case, I can say I'm going to make a snapshot. I'm just going to click OK here. It just gives me some information about the disk access, and then it might slow down my machine down temporarily. And there's my snapshot now. So if I, at some other point, do something destructive, maybe I just was going through here and I meant to move these files. These are critical startup files for Windows NT based operating systems. If I accidentally just deleted these permanently and I just started clicking on yes on everything, well, I just lost my startup files. And I guess I could delete this one too. That's a startup file as well. Well, great. Now I don't remember what was in my boot INI file, and now I've got to go back and get some of those files back. It's really easy enough to fix if you use System Restore, or if you know what the files are and you can just restore them from another known good working machine. But other things that I could do that would really cause a problem is maybe I've got certain portions of the registry, and I've gone in here and I was trying to fix something, but in reality I wound up actually messing something up. Maybe if I deleted an entire registry key and all of its subkeys under Windows here, well, that's pretty destructive. So, next time I boot up the machine, it blue screens or it locks or it won't start up again at all. All I have to do is to go back to this snapshot, go back to the snapshot that I just made, and go to, and watch how quickly this will return to my previous state. And the message I clicked past back there, by the way, just mentioned that it would override any changes I had made recently. And then I'll just click OK, and bam, right now I am back at the same machine that I was at previously. That's even faster on it than using something like Ghost or imaging software on physical machines. That took, apart from my talking and pausing a little bit and explaining it while I was going, that probably took only 10 seconds to do the whole thing, and now I'm back in a known good working state again. Now, as I've said so many times in the past, we do use VMware a lot in a course like this one, and it's an invaluable tool, and I will not obfuscate that from you or try to conceal that in any way. I'll just show you my VMware machines as I launch them. You see that I've already installed the VMware Workstation here. How do I get VMware Workstation or download and install it? Well, to download it, you simply go to their website, and the installation is also pretty easy once you've downloaded their files. It's just a next finish wizard, so it's pretty easy that way. Let's go ahead and take a look at VMware's website. And as we go here, we'll see that we can go to their products, somebody's menus here, go to their products and download VMware Workstation. Now you see that they have a number of other products here as well. For example, the VMware Player is very good for developers if they want to ship somebody a CD of software that they want to be able to, that a client wants to be able to test out, but they don't want to install it on their own live machines. Well, the VMware Player is a free player that they can use to simply test out an operating system and test out that software without affecting their actual machines, their physical machines. Also, the VMware Workstation is what we're going to be using, of course, but there are server products here as well, which are very useful for servers that, for example, might have multiple processors on them. You can install multiple guest operating systems that are dedicated to specific processors. In any case, we're really only concerned with VMware Workstation here. That's more than enough for what we'll be needing for our purposes. And then to get to that product, we simply download the workstation, or you can just simply click Evaluate Workstation, either one. Ultimately, in our case, they're going to get us both to the same place because I'm assuming that you're going to download the evaluation version of the software. So what you'd have to do is to register for the free evaluation, and then you'll simply either log in if you've already got an existing account, or register, and you'll have to enter in, your name and phone number and stuff like that. Which is well worth the effort because this product is an excellent product. The evaluation product is good for 30 days. If you do decide to buy it, I haven't bought it for a while, but I think it's like $189 or something like that, and very well worth it. In any case, once you've gone through the process and you download it, it is kind of a large file, so just be prepared for a lengthy download if you have a slow internet connection, and you may need to allow it to download overnight. Once you've downloaded it, simply double-click on the executable. You'll next finish your way through a wizard, at which point you'll wind up with a desktop shortcut here, and if you want to, it optionally can also put a quick launch item down here at the bottom. If you're a Linux user, you can also download a Linux version of this software. Oh, also, by the way, if you have 64-bit processors, then you can potentially use 64-bit guest operating systems from within your host as well. Now, I'll explain the difference between a guest and a host here as we go. Now, then let's go ahead and address with VMware how we actually use it. First of all, you're going to need to log into an operating system, but prior to that, you need to have a good understanding of the difference between a host and a guest. Right now, you're looking at the host operating system. This is the host that's going to contain one or more VMware guests. This is my main physical Windows XP desktop that's installed on a physical hard disk in my physical computer. However, in my virtual machines, which is another way we call these things, we have virtual machines that are going to be guests in VMware Workstation, and you can see that I've already got a few installed here. This client, for example, is a Windows XP Professional client. I've also got a paused Windows Server 2000, Windows 2000 server here as well, and we see a screenshot of how it looks here. And by the way, if you want to click it, then it gives you a better idea of how that looks. We also have a Red Hat 9 working here. That's a little bit of an older version of Linux, but it really doesn't matter because all the Linux commands that we'll be performing are going to be the same regardless of your version of Linux. And I can also, of course, add Windows Server 2003 or whatever if I want as well. Now, if you don't already have some virtual machines to work with and you're new to VMware, what you would do is to create your own virtual machine, and you would do that by clicking File, New, Virtual Machine, and then it'll launch a wizard that you'll next finish your way through. You can choose typical configurations, which is what we'll usually do, or custom, which gives you a little bit more flexibility. I'll leave that on your own if you want to go through all the various configuration options, but with the typical operations, we can choose which operating system we want. You see a number of different Windows operating systems, a number of different Linux operating systems as well here. For example, maybe I'm installing SUSE Linux, or some people call it SUSE Linux. So I'll select that option and click on Next, where I'll then specify a directory for it to install in. And I typically will install it on a local drive, a separate partition many times, but it doesn't have to be. And then I've created a machines directory here where I've got a lot of other operating systems that I've created, virtual operating systems that I've created. So I'll just call this SUSE Linux, for example. Now, also, I'm not going to actually go through with the entire installation of SUSE Linux because our job here right now is not to show you how to install Linux, but I am showing you how to work with VMware. You just need to prep it so that it can accept an installation. Here, I'll just click on Next, and I have a number of different networking options. I could use bridged networking, which simply means that I'll have direct access to the Ethernet network the same way that any other network device would on my physical network. Each guest will have its own IP address on this network. So if I have a DHCP server, of course it can issue an IP address to my guest operating system. I could use network address translation. Now with NAT, my host operating system will of course have a physical IP address on my physical network. My guest operating systems will have dedicated IP addresses of their own that will not be available. They'll be private IP addresses, and they will be behind the host operating system. In order to access the rest of the network, they do so through the host operating system's IP address. So if I've got 3 virtual machines running all at the same time, all accessing the network, then it looks like they're all actually the host operating system when you look at the network traffic on the network. It can also be very useful if you want to for somewhat concealing attack machines if you're inside of a network and trying to do some work there. Although it could arouse suspicion if you have one IP address that's extremely busy on the network, depending on what kind of activity it's doing. And then there's also host-only networking, and with this, my virtual machines, my guests, would only be able to communicate with one another. They would not even be able to communicate with the host operating system, much less the rest of the physical network, or I could choose not to use a network connection at all. I'm just going to use bridged networking for our purposes. And then we choose what kind of disk capacity we want to use. Newer versions of VMware start off with 8 gigabytes, which is pretty large. You got to really keep that in mind as well, because later on you might want to copy this to, or burn it to a DVD, for example, transport it to another computer, and run it on that other computer. Which is, by the way, certainly a possibility. That's one of the advantages of VMware, is that it's not hardware specific. So I could move it. In any case, it's going to be too big for a DVD if I leave it at 8 gigabytes. So I'll make it, let's say, 4 gigabytes. And I can allocate all the disk space now, which gives you a somewhat of a performance advantage. And if it's a large size, like 4 gigabytes or more, then I could split it into 2 gigabyte files, which some people also say is a performance advantage. I really can't tell the difference, so maybe that's just me. In any case, once you're finished, I've already got a CD in the CD-ROM drive with SUSE Linux on it. So I'll just click on this green play button, the power on button up here at the top, to power on the machine. And then once I do that, you can go into BIOS settings here, just the same way as you would with any physical machine, and you can adjust the startup order. By default, it will boot from the CD first, because it kind of assumes that you'll have an operating system CD in the tray that you want to install from. And at this point, then, you can see that it's going to give me the installation options for SUSE Linux. And then I would just proceed with a normal installation. I'm going to go ahead and power off the machine right now by hitting the red stop button up here, because I don't really intend to complete an installation of SUSE Linux. Now, if I did install this and I used it a lot and I wanted it, then I could keep it over here in my list of favorites as well. You can do that by right-clicking on one of these items, on these tabs, and then you can choose Add to Favorites. In my case, it's already over there, so I can also choose Remove from Favorites, and I'll say yes. But to emphasize the point again, to add, just right-click and choose Add to Favorites. So that's how that's done. If you don't want that extra real estate occupying space over here on the far left, you can eliminate the favorites item by clicking on this button up here at the top, and that just removes the favorites pane from your display. If it turns out that some of the settings were not really what you wanted for this operating system, you can also edit those things. I can choose Edit Virtual Machine Settings, and I click on that item. For example, 256 megabytes of RAM for a desktop Linux installation is probably more than I really need, and I'd rather keep that extra RAM for my main host operating system, and also to make more room for other simultaneously running guest operating systems on the computer. So I might back that down to 128, and that's usually a good spot for virtual machines, as long as they don't do anything too demanding. If I need to add additional disks, I can do that as well by clicking on Add, or any other kind of hardware. USB access is still available. I can plug in a USB device, and for example, on a Windows XP computer or any other plug-and-play operating system, it will detect that new device through the USB controller in the virtual machine. So it detects my physical USB device, even though we're working with a virtual machine here. So that's pretty cool as well. And then, having gotten out of there, let me go ahead and close this tab. You can do that by right-clicking on those and choosing Close. If you need to open it up again, since we don't have it visible here at all anymore, we can simply click File, Open, and then browse for your virtual machine wherever they appear on your hard disk. Now, to start up a virtual machine, again, you just simply click Start this virtual machine. I'm doing this one here because I've got Red Hat version 9 already installed here, so I'm going to go ahead and let that boot. While that's getting started, let me go over here to this Windows Server 2003 machine, or Windows 2000 machine right here. And the reason why I point this one out is because, as I mentioned earlier, this machine is paused. This is very similar in what it does to a Windows computer going into hibernate mode. It takes the contents of memory, dumps them out into a file on disk, and then when you start the computer up again, it reads the contents of that file on disk and dumps it back into memory, and you get pretty much the same exact conditions and state that you were in when you first paused or hibernated the machine. So I could click Start Virtual Machine here, and it gives me an opportunity to start up a virtual machine. Now it's taking a little bit longer than it normally would here because I have another operating system simultaneously booting, but in terms of performance, VMware pausing and resuming these virtual machines is typically very, very fast as long as it's not competing with a lot of other things going on at the same time. Now, as this operating system gets started, take a look at something. Notice that I've got two mouse pointers here. Well, see, this mouse pointer that I'm currently moving right now, that's actually the mouse pointer for the host operating system. In order to activate and use the mouse pointer inside of the guest operating system, I have to click somewhere within the guest operating system. So I click right now. Notice that the host operating system mouse pointer goes away, and I now have control of the mouse pointer from within the guest. Notice another thing that can be quite annoying, although there is a workaround for this. I can't get out of this. If I want to use my mouse pointer and click on my host start menu down in the lower left corner, that green start menu, I can't get there. I can access the one from within Windows 2000 Server here. I can't get to the other one, though. How do I get out of this? Well, if you hold down Control and Alt, that breaks out your mouse pointer. That's what I just did. That's why I have two mouse pointers again. And now I can go back to this start menu, and we're back in business that way. So that's just some things to keep in mind with the way all of this works. Also, let me just go ahead and quickly log out here. And when I log off of this as the administrator account, and by the way, I'll typically be logging in as administrator or trainer. Trainer is also an administrator account in the CBT Nuggets videos. Or I'll be logging into our Linux systems as root. Those are all the highest level administrator accounts that you can use. Inadvisable in many situations because you don't want to log on as an administrator. In our case, we do log on as an administrator because most hackers will have local administrator access to their own machines, and that's what they hack from. In any case, but in corporations, of course, it's not advisable. But I'm going to log in here. How do I do that? Watch what happens. It says right there on the window, press Control-Alt-Delete to begin. So I hit Control-Alt-Delete. Ooh, now what happened? Got some kind of a message here. What's going on? Well, what goes on there is that in a virtual machine, you don't really press Control-Alt-Delete, even though it says to do so right there. What you do here is, if I press Control-Alt-Delete, then that could be interpreted by the host operating system as a Control-Alt-Delete, and we don't want to confuse our operating systems. So to substitute for Control-Alt-Delete in the guest operating system, you press down Control-Alt and then Insert. Then you get your logon dialog box, if I can type my password. And once we log on, we're back in business that way. Now, I mentioned earlier that this mouse pointer thing is kind of a nuisance. I don't really like it that much. Also, if you look at the desktop here, it doesn't look that good. And when I put up some kind of a high-color wallpaper or even 256-bit wallpaper or something, it's not going to look that good. Why is that? Well, if I right-click and choose Properties, notice that if I go to the Settings tab, then I've only got 16 colors. I can't even choose anymore. And I don't really have many resolution choices here either, although for purposes of our videos, the virtual machines will always be 640 by 480. So what can I do to get around that? Because this is not a very fun place to work right now. What I can do is to Control-Alt again to break out my mouse pointer, then go up here to VM and install, if I can use my mouse, install VMware Tools. I'm just going to go ahead and click on Install here. What happens is it takes over the CD-ROM for this virtual machine, and it has an ISO file that it reads as if it were a CD-ROM. Then it does autoplay, and it launches a wizard to install these tools. And really, this is very easy. Just next, finish through it, and then you'll have to restart the computer when it's done. And after that, you'll have much better control of the mouse. You'll be able to move back and forth at will between the host operating system and the guest operating system. And you'll also have much better video capabilities as well. And that's all illustrated by the fact that I have now, in the pause there, I rebooted this computer after installing all the tools. Notice that I get much better looking color here. This icon here, for example, has better color. I have better mouse control. You wouldn't have known that earlier, but as I was moving the mouse around, it was kind of herky-jerky, and it didn't look that good. I also have more screen resolution options if I want. So if I go to screen resolution, notice that I get better color choices, and you can see that I've got quite a few different choices in variety in terms of my resolution there as well. Notice that I can also break this mouse pointer out of the guest operating system simply by moving it wherever I want it to go. So I can click on the Windows XP Start menu, or I can click on the Windows 2000 Server Start menu, and I don't have to do the Control-Alt keyboard trick to break in and out of this. And then as we return to our whiteboard, just remember that if you want to break out of your guest operating system and get back to your host operating system and you don't have VMware tools installed, you can simply press Control-Alt to go back to your host operating system. Otherwise, and this is a better option anyway, just install VMware tools. You don't have to pay for anything. It's included with the software with VMware. And that will allow you to easily move your mouse pointer back and forth between your guest and your host. Also, let's take a look at changing the views of VMware. We have a variety of different options with the way our VMware machine looks, and this is going to be a matter of personal preference for most people. What we could do is we could go back to our show or hide favorites item. So by clicking that, again, it shows me my favorites over here, and there's a expandable pane over there so I can make it larger or smaller as I wish. And I can click it again to remove those favorites items. I can also go over here, let's go over here actually, to this button, which is the quick switch item. Now, of course, all of these have equivalents in the menu system, so I could go to those same items over here on the menu system, but typically people just use the buttons. So if I click on Quick Switch, then notice that it makes the entire window pretty much cover the screen, including my Windows XP host operating system start menu down here at the bottom. This is a little bit less cluttered, and yet at the same time I can still switch back and forth between other operating systems if I want. Go back to Red Hat over here if I need to, or back to Windows, or over to my Windows XP computer and start that up. If I want to go back to a previous view, however, all I have to do is go up here again, move my mouse pointer up to the top, and notice that all of this has actually been concealed with auto hide. If I click this button again, quick switch button again, then it takes me back into just a normal window, and of course I can expand that as well. Now then finally, and this is the way you should work if you're going to be in a virtual machine for a prolonged period of time, finally you can go to this item here, which is the full screen button. Now I'm going to click on that, but it's going to look kind of strange to you. What that really does is it fills the screen with the operating system from border to border. Now probably in this recording, it's not going to look quite like that. That just has to do with the way that the software that I'm using records the screen. It's not capable of recording this quite in full screen the way I would like it to. So most of the time I'll be working within some kind of a tabbed interface like we see, pretty close to what we see right here. In this nugget, we discussed why we want to use VMware. And remember that one of the key reasons is because sometimes we just want to protect ourselves, actually all the time, we want to protect ourselves from other hackers that potentially have more malicious intent than we might. And we want to make sure that we can isolate ourselves from the network when we need to, and also that if something bad does happen or a machine is compromised or becomes unstable, that we can always go back using a snapshot to a known good version of that operating system. Also with VMware, of course, you can run any number of different operating systems within your guest operating systems. Also, we took a look at actually using VMware and how to make your way around the interface and how to make it work for you in the most efficient possible way for your preferences. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.